David Bowie's 60s period was an era of trial and error as a young David Jones tried to find his unique style, wrestled with the charts, got dropped by label after label, and kind of got stuck in a rut while trying to shake off the curse of being a one-hit wonder. In this mini-series, Dan and I will be taking a look at every David Bowie single and ranking them from A star to F. Before we start, it's worth mentioning that these rankings are all relative to that era, so a B-grade 60 single won't necessarily be level with a B-grade 70 single. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss part 2, and if you haven't seen it yet, it's worth watching our video where we rank every single Bowie album, linked to in the comments section below. Credited to Davy Jones and the King Bees, Bowie's first single was released in June 1964 when Bowie was just 17 years old. Remarkable now only for the fact that it's David Bowie, it's a pleasant enough single. It's a cover, it's loud, raucous, and certainly of its time. It hasn't aged quite as well as Bowie's 70s singles, but it's still quite good. Still, I'd give it a C. I Pity the Fool is a soulful blues song. It's another cover, and this time it featured session musician Jimmy Page, who'd later go on to found Led Zeppelin. And although it sticks to an age-old blues pattern, the session really taught Bowie the importance of the musicians that he played with. That's why I've given this song a B. David Bowie's first self-penned A-side, You've Got a Habit of Leaving, released as Davy Jones and the Lower Third, sees Bowie trying to emulate the other vocal pop groups popular at the time. Full of interesting chord changes inspired by classical music, the song is let down by its reductive lyrics. Thankfully, Bowie's songwriting would develop with later releases, so we don't have to put up with obvious rhymes like sad, bad, glad for much longer. This song is a D in my opinion. The first Bowie single to be released in the US, Can't Help Thinking About Me, continues Bowie's experiments with picking obscure and clashing chords, this time combining them with a catchy chorus in this weird attempt at mod pop. Though Bowie still had plenty to learn about lyrics and songwriting, this is a decent early attempt and gets a C. This largely forgotten and obscure Bowie single is pretty standard and unremarkable. It's worth having listened to, it isn't bad, it's just boring compared to the vast majority of Bowie's singles, and that's why it gets a D in my opinion. Groovy, depressing, probably the most obvious social commentary Bowie penned, I Dig Everything was Bowie's last single before being kicked from the Pie record label. While the writing itself is interesting, the lyrics jar with the 60s pop production, and while probably intentional, it makes for a rather uncomfortable listening experience. Still, I think the song is a C. Now, here's where things start to get weird. Part of Bowie's Baroque pop phase, Rubber Band was a novelty single, clearly meant to be funny. The song is significant as it showed Bowie's first major musical shift, this time exploring a throwback music hall sound pioneered by contemporary bands such as the Beatles and the Kinks. The single is remembered fondly, if only for the fact that the B-side, The London Boys, is one of Bowie's best-loved early compositions. I'd give this single a B.
And that brings us to Laughing Gnome. A novelty track, sure, but definitely entertaining, and compared to pretty much everything else Bowie's releasing at this period, it's at least interesting. Now, interesting should not be considered necessarily good. In 1990, on his Sound and Vision tour, it was the most requested song, mostly due to a campaign run in The Enemy magazine. Laughing Gnome came not just first by a significant amount, and David Bowie didn't even perform it once. However, just for the sake of annoying a lot of people in the comments, I'm going to put it as a B.
Hold on, Dan, we can't just give a track a B just to annoy people. We're meant to be kind of semi-serious reviewers, and I really don't think that this track is anywhere close to being a B. I personally would put it as an F, but I do see where you're coming from. It is unique, and also you're never going to forget it. So maybe I'd bump this up to a D. Bowie's foray into Baroque pop ended with this surprisingly good pop song. While the lyrics are meant to be funny, it isn't as cringeworthy as The Laughing Gnome, and it isn't as twee as Rubber Band. Out of all of this style of Bowie, I think this is the one that I listen to the most, which is probably why I'd give it an A.
Final single of the 1960s for David Bowie, Space Oddity. What can be said that hasn't been said a million times before about this song? Not much, but to put it any lower than A+ would be probably sacrilege.
I'm not gonna lie, Space Oddity is undoubtedly the best Bowie single from this era. Not only was it one of his breakthrough hits, but it became a Bowie classic. It started his career-spanning fascination with the extraterrestrial, and it pushed him out of his novelty act phase. This is really the moment that the David Bowie we all know came into existence, and while the previous singles are all worth hearing, they're more curios for Bowie fans rather than songs people would actively choose to listen to. Space Oddity is where this all changes, and that's why I've given it an A-star. Writing a follow-up single to Space Oddity was never going to be easy, and Bowie took a step back from his bold and ambitious sound with the release of Prettiest Star. Featuring friend and contemporary artist Mark Bolan on lead guitar, The Prettiest Star is laid back, but it lacks the immediacy, catchiness and cultural relevance of the previous single. Bowie would later revisit the song more successfully on his Aladdin Sane album, but for now, this song scores an A. Somebody at Mercury Records must have liked Bowie a lot. Not only was he in danger of becoming a one-hit wonder following his failure to follow up on the success of Space Oddity, but this particular choice of single showed that Bowie wasn't particularly aiming for the charts. For those who are unfamiliar with this track, Memory is basically a 7-minute closing track from the Space Oddity album. It's a free-flowing, folky epic that works well in the context of the album, but it had to be split in half to fit on a 7-inch single. Bowie went back into the studio and added drums, electric guitars, and a very prominent synthesizer to what was initially a mostly acoustic track, which makes the single version remarkably different and kind of sets the scene for the Man Who Sold the World album. While I don't prefer it to the album version, compared to everything else coming out of this era, it's probably an A. So there we have it, David Bowie's singles 64 to 70 ranked. Subscribe for part 2, which is going to be 1971 to 1980. It's going to be a very interesting decade, it's going to be full of hits, it's going to be very different to what we've just covered. And don't forget to comment below if you think we've got it wrong, tell us your favourite hit from this era, unless it's Laughing Gnome, and we'll see you next time.